Hey, good morning. Uncle Lou here. Yep, that's right. It's me, Uncle Lou, live for you on LouTube today. Yep, thanks for watching. Now, what I'm going to do today is this is going to be a prediction video. We're going to start with the SEC East. Then we'll move to the SEC West. If there's time, I'm going to do this all in one video. If not, I'll do the East in one and the West in one. And this will be a series of videos. I'll do the ACC, Pac-12, Big 10, and Big 12 as well. Now, these are my final preseason predictions with one caveat. If there's some sort of major injury in preseason camp or fall practice before week 1, I may go in and change some of this, but you know, I'm not just going to change my mind for any other random reason. These are going to be my final 2017 preseason predictions. So here we go. We're going to start in the SEC East. Now, as much as I hate to admit it and wish it weren't true, if you're going to talk about the SEC East, then in my opinion, you have to start with Florida Gators. For a couple of reasons. They're back-to-back defending East champions. They've won the East the last 2 years in a row. They've beat Georgia the last 3 years in a row. They did lose to Tennessee last year, but that was the first time they've lost to them in 11 years, I believe it was. They're something like 35-1 against Kentucky in the last 36 years. Anyway, so I just feel like you have to start with them. Now, of course, this is going to be conference predictions and nothing more. So for the purposes of this video, it doesn't matter what happens, for example, in the Florida-Michigan game or the South Carolina-NC State game or the Florida-FSU game for that matter, or the Alabama-Florida State game. This is conference predictions. Now, Florida... You know, I gave Florida hell last year for that whole fake rainout thing they did against LSU to try to get the game moved. Of course, they ended up playing it in Baton Rouge anyway, or playing it in Baton Rouge instead a month or so later, and they won that game. Because of that, Florida has an extra home game this season. They're supposed to play at LSU this year, but that game got flip-flopped last year, so they're playing at or in Gainesville this year against LSU. And an extra home game in your SEC schedule is a big deal. Home field advantage is real, especially when it comes to the fan bases in the SEC. LSU in particular is a big difference between playing at LSU in what would probably be a night game versus playing in Gainesville. So this is a big advantage for Florida this year, in my opinion, that extra home game. They only play 3 true road games. Now, of course, I mentioned the Michigan game not counting. That's a neutral site game. They also play, of course, Georgia every year in Jacksonville. But they only have 3 true road games. Their first one, I think, is week 3 at Kentucky. And then they don't have another true road game until November. So they have a very, very, very favorable schedule. So when I look at Florida, you know, I see them definitely beating some of your bottom tier SEC East teams. Vanderbilt, Kentucky, and Mizzou. Now, if you're a fan of another team in the SEC East, you really have to hope they lose one of those games. My opinion, really, on the SEC East, I think any more than 2 SEC losses, obviously, you're out in the East this year, I think, because of the way Florida's schedule sets up. I can't see them losing more than 2 conference games. So you pick the 2. But I feel like whoever wins the SEC East, if it's not Florida, I feel like they're going to have to beat Florida and not have more than 2 losses. So what my prediction really comes down to for the SEC East this year, I'll sort of start at the bottom and work my way up, I guess, of what I think will be the final standings. A lot of people are talking about Vanderbilt and Kentucky this year, you know, being better. And I've talked about this on a few of my live streams. When you hear people talk about Vanderbilt and Kentucky being better, and this is something Vanderbilt and Kentucky fans need to pay special and close attention to, no one is talking about you winning the East. Not seriously. I mean, that's just not happening right now if you're Vanderbilt or Kentucky. And then they say, well, Uncle Lou, people talking about Vanderbilt and Kentucky going to be better. Yeah, look, listen, when people talk about Vanderbilt or Kentucky being better, what they mean is the potential to make a bowl game, okay? Vanderbilt, Kentucky, and you can throw Mizzou in there this year too, are teams that have no chance of winning the SEC East at all. Of those three teams, Vanderbilt, Missouri, and Kentucky, all three of those will be lucky to hover around the 500 mark, in my opinion, and I think maybe one of those three teams makes a bowl game. So that brings us down to the next four. Of course, you can figure out who they are in no particular order: Tennessee, South Carolina, Florida, and Georgia. South Carolina, we'll start there. I feel like they will be better than they were last year, but not leaps and bounds better. I think they're limited by their head coach, to be honest. Will he be as bad as he was at Florida over the long run? Probably not. I mean, you tend to learn something with experience, so I don't think he'll be as bad as he was at Florida, but I just can't see him winning the East right now. They have talent in a few key positions. I'll give Jake Bentley some credit. He's looked good at times. He's still really, really young. And Sky Moore, Debo Samuel, they've got a few good players. I don't think they have enough elite players, and they definitely don't have the depth to make it through an SEC season to the point of winning the East. Tennessee, sort of a similar story, except they're going to be worse, I think, than last year. It just seemed like everything Tennessee was doing was building towards last season. And if they were going to finally get over the hump and win the East, and this isn't a trash talking video, this is just honest opinion here. So I mean, you can feel free to disagree, but I'm not talking trash here. I feel like if they were going to get over the hump and win the East, last year was the year to do it. They beat Florida and Georgia, but somehow they managed to fall apart at the end. Whether you want to blame it on injuries, or coaching, or a combination of the two, or whatever, the point is they didn't get it done last year. And the first thing I look at when I'm evaluating a team in the offseason is this team going to be better or worse than what they were last year? And for Tennessee, to me, the smell test, they're going to be worse. I don't see how they can replace Dobbs, Kamara, Hurd, Derek Barnett, Cameron Sutton. I mean, if you were to make a list of the top 10 players on Tennessee's team last year, at least 7 or 8 of those guys are gone. Now, Butch Jones has recruited well over the last few years, but those guys are inexperienced, and I just can't see them repeating what they did last year and beating Georgia and Florida in the same year. They still have yet to beat Will Muschamp, so that game's sort of a toss-up right now, Tennessee, South Carolina. I can't see them losing another game to Vandy, but they've lost 3 out of 5 to Vandy, and Vandy put up 1,000 yards and about 70 points on them last year. So, and that game's all the way at the end of the year, so who knows what kind of shape those teams will be in by then. But I think South Carolina and Tennessee will be fighting over the 3 and 4 spot in the SEC East this year. I think both teams make a bowl game, and that leaves us with Georgia and Florida. You look at Georgia, our toughest conference games at Tennessee and at Auburn. Auburn, of course, I think being the tougher of those two, and we'll talk about that more when we get to the West. If their quarterback ends up being the real deal, then Auburn has potential to be a pretty good team this year. I have to see that to believe it, though. We play, of course, Florida and Jacksonville. We get South Carolina at home, which is good because UGA has struggled in Columbia over the last 5 or 6 years. We got the win there last year in an ugly game, but over the last 5 or 6 years we have struggled there, so that's a good thing for UGA that we get them at home. And we get Mississippi State from the West at home, as opposed to like last year having to travel to Ole Miss. So when I look at Georgia, I think they're going to be better than what they were last year. We get back 18 out of 21 starters. 27 of our 32 players that played the most snaps last year return. All the key players return. Eason, your biggest jump usually occurs between year 1 and 2, so I look for him to have a much better year this year than last year. Chubb and Michelle, in my opinion, are the best 1-2 combination running backs in America. The offensive line, there's no way. I'm not here to tell you that Georgia's offensive line is going to be elite. I am here to tell you it's absolutely impossible for them to be as bad as they were last year. Front four, I'll put our front four up against anybody else in America. Alabama may have more depth, second and third string than UGA. I'll give them credit there. But as far as starting 3 or 4 along the defensive line, I'll take UGA over any team in America. We have NFL linebackers. In the secondary, we're gonna be young at a couple of spots. I think we'll be starting at least one true freshman in the secondary, probably Richard LeCount. But Dominic Sanders returns, currently sitting on 12 interceptions, has a chance to become the UJ's all-time interception leader. UJ's defense was about 15th in the country last year. They'll be top 10 this year for sure, return 10 starters from last year. So I think the East is going to come down to the Georgia-Florida game. If Florida can't get their quarterback situation figured out, they've had 3 or 4 years. McElwain can't get a quarterback. I don't understand it. I don't know why. The guy's supposed to be an offensive guru. He's been riding the coattails of Muschamp's defense for the last couple of years. That defense is playing on Sundays now. Florida's still going to have an elite defense, and there won't be that huge of a drop-off. I do not think their defense will be as good this year as it has been the last 2 years. So if their offense doesn't find a way to improve, then I don't think Florida wins the East. I think we'll beat them in Jacksonville, and Georgia wins the East with 2 or less conference losses. The problem is if we lose to Florida, I think we could lose to Florida and still finish the season with 2 losses, but not win the East because losing a tiebreaker to a 2-conference loss, Florida. So that's where I get that from. I feel like we have to beat Florida in Jacksonville. I feel like that's the most important game of the season, even though it might not be the hardest or most difficult game of the season. I feel like that's definitely the most important. So that's my prediction for the East. Winner of the Georgia-Florida game will win the East. Obviously, I'm predicting it'll be Georgia. Georgia wins the East, represents the SEC East in Atlanta. And I think that's long enough for this video. We'll do a separate video for the SEC West. I'll have that up tomorrow. Also, the live streams, if you've been watching those, the season that I've been doing on EA Sports NCAA football I have the updated UGA roster. So it's the 2017 roster. So Eason, Chubb, Michelle, McCole Hardman playing the slot, Jeremiah Holloman at wide receiver, Riley Ridley, Trent Thompson, Roquan Smith, Dominic Sanders, Richard LeCount, all those guys, they're all on the team. Been doing a whole season. A couple of nights ago, we played the Georgia Tech game, humiliated them. So the bowl game is what's coming up. Now. That'll be happening tomorrow, Sunday. Most likely in the evening, 8 or 9, but I will post something tomorrow, probably when I do the SEC West video tomorrow. I'll let you know exactly what time I'm going to be doing that. Anyway, tell me why I'm wrong in the comment section. Have a great day and a good morning. I'll talk to you later. SEC rules the world.